On this special news interview, Bharat FM is happy to feature Vasanthi Hariprakash, a popular Bengaluru-based radio anchor and TV journalist, columnist and a public speaker who has just won the Laadli Media Award 2020 for gender-sensitive journalism for her coverage of women's issues in Karnataka elections. Her dynamic career in the media has taken her across the bustling newsrooms of the New Indian Express, the quiet soundproof studios of Radio City Bangalore and All India Radio, on the field as a special correspondent for NDTV 24/7, and to faraway lands such as Laos and Vietnam as a documentary anchor for BBC World News. She's also now set to be a podcaster with an upcoming series on a true story of a business tycoon from South India. A multilingual storyteller, Vasanthi is presently the founder-editor of Pickle Jar, a voice video text content company that aims to tell stories of a vibrant and changing India. During the Lok Sabha elections in June 2019, Vasanthi reported untold stories while being on a 3,000-kilometer 18-day road trip across Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, urban span, villages and towns that she called the Pickle Jar Poll Express. Here is Vasanthi Hariprakash. Welcome to Bharat FM, Vasanthi. It's a great pleasure to have you on.
Mayank, no matter how much pleasure you say you have, there's going to be +1 from my side.
Oh, how nice. How nice. That's so lovely of you to say. Congratulations on a remarkable award that you just won, the Laadli Award for your reports on, in fact, reflecting gender sensitivity in your election coverage in Karnataka in 2018.
Thank you, Mayank. It's it's almost like one of those the Oscar speech moments that I might launch off to say, oh, I would like to thank my neighbor for this and who else, but because it really has been quite a collaborative effort, but it's certainly a thrilling moment for all of us that work was noticed.
No, it is remarkable, especially because it talks about gender sensitivity, which has been a problem in Indian print media journalism, and even in many other parts of the world, including in America. So tell me, to begin with, what you think is gender sensitive journalism.
I would think that the kind of reporting that places gender, or for that matter, I'm not even putting one gender before the other, whether we are talking about male, female, or trans people, if you're putting people on the same, let's say, at par while you're reporting, while not really putting anyone on a pedestal or not really looking down or being patronizing, condescending, that should be good for starters. We're really talking about something like that, from the word go. There are, of course, many more aspects which probably we will discuss as we go. But gender sensitivity can be quite a cliched term, Mayank, and I'm really glad that you're kind of dwelling on that very premise of the Laadli Media Award.
You got your award for specifically for reporting on Karnataka elections and the way you highlighted women's issues. Why didn't you tell us a bit about how you approached it and what triggered it?
I would probably like to take you back and all those who are viewing us, listening to us, to this month of April in 2018. That was a time when who had taken a, let's say, break from mainstream television, national news media, had thought that, okay, the reporter in me had said tata bye-bye. Because there was a time when I had too much of breaking news, more than my soul could take. And I had told myself that, okay, let me do something a little more deeper, meaningful than really what TV news media affords. Now, it's not really a reflection on the channel that I used to work for, which was really at least one of the best that one can get to work in. It was a very gender-sensitive workplace, I must say, NDTV. But at the same time, I think it is the nature of the beast, Mayank, as you would know better than anyone else, that there is a sense of atrupti, that you are not able to do what needs to be done for when you are the one who has the mic, when you are the one who has the vantage view of news that's happening before your eyes. And so it was that after this break, and by which time I had gone on to do various different things in my career after taking a break from NDTV. That is, I had involved myself by then with a tribal radio station network, watching them grow, the CG Netswara. I had, a good friend Nilesh Misra with Gaon Connection. So I had traveled to Uttar Pradesh to see how that rural media platform is emerging. Also, of course, anchoring events, which was my, let's say, the part that would pay the bills. So likewise, also mentoring young people for the US Consulate alumni network. So there was a variety of things that I had gotten to do, but not ground reporting. So when 2018 assembly elections were just around the corner, there was this restlessness to say that, okay, what the national media is saying about one's own state, Karnataka, is not really anywhere close to what's playing out. I mean, what really is. At the same time, I was thinking to myself, okay, here I am, an independent media person, and what really can I do that will even carry my voice to the people? I mean, I would have to be at the mercy of newspapers for starters, because I wasn't even thinking digital at that time as much as I was like, okay, probably I would go and do some reports. But there was this gentleman, a very good friend of mine, Uday Vijayan, who literally picked the phone on me and said, listen, I've been telling you for a long time, since about January that year, saying that the elections are coming up, but you keep saying, okay, but how am I going to get onto the ground in these parts of Karnataka? But why should we suffer someone from somewhere up north, or somebody who's trying to give a sort of, parachute dropped view on Karnataka, whereas we know that you've reported and you've been on radio and you really know this land and culture and language. So that was like, this sort of a josh and push. And it just happened that particular morning when the election commission announced the elections, I was like, okay, all charged up, like that mythological story where Hanuman sees an ocean before him and says that, okay, how am I going to cross this ocean? And it's all the, the Vanars and Jambavans says, okay, you can go ahead and do it. So I guess there was this sort of external injection that I needed. But that very night, I did reach out to a few people from this Pickle Jar team. I know we have not yet introduced Pickle Jar, but suffice to say at this point that, okay, that's how I just reached out to people on that group saying, I am anyway hitting the ground, and I'm going to just plot a few places in Karnataka, which from my reporting experience, I can see are absolutely underserved, Mayank. So these are parts of North Karnataka, regions that are get called Hyderabad Karnataka, because they're, the erstwhile Nizam state. So these are, so essentially, literally looked at the map of Karnataka and said, okay, within my budget or savings that I'm going to pull out, what is it that I can really go on the ground, because there is no substitute for that. And that's how 10 districts. And so point number one was to really select those places where I really wanted to go and travel and just see what we find. And one thing, I wasn't sure what I'm going to find, but I was very sure of what I'm not going to do, which is that I wouldn't have an agenda. I wouldn't have this chashma already to say that, okay, how these stories will pan out. I was very sure that I will allow the land and the ground to surprise me and us, those who will travel. I will also make sure that those who have never been asked, what's life like? What do you want? When it's elections, what could make life better? Nothing very radical that let's say no reporter had asked before, but probably it wasn't the who was being asked. And in that who were a sizable percentage of was of women. It's not even as if I said, okay, I have this tick mark and I shall ask women, but it was absolutely organic for me that if I reach a place and if there are a group of men who are in the panchayat or something like that, then automatically my eyes are searching for, okay, so where are the women? So when you ask a woman, literally the answers are so wholesome. I mean, it gives you a really multi-dimensional picture of what's the scenario. No offense meant to the men folk I interviewed, but the story that emerged from these different districts was what we tied into. I mean, amongst the other reports which were carried on the News Minute and then CNN News 18, I was let's say one of the South India news analysts for Karnataka. But for The Wire, we did a whole series, and Siddharth was really kind enough. Siddharth Varadarajan was one of those who was also equally enthusiastic about this project, and we managed to carry a whole video series. And one of them was as simple as women demand freedom, water, toilets, because it was really the voices of those women. It was not even as if I was standing with a mic and saying, this is what the news is. It was really like I was the reflector of what those voices and those women were saying. And that was one of the jury picks for the Laadli Award.
Oh, that's wonderful. It strikes me that the way you described it, you did not go with the specific idea of doing gender-specific or gender-sensitive journalism. It just happened along the way, given the way you naturally approach these subjects. So when you were recording your stories, the way you constructed your questions, were they prompted by this idea at the back of your mind, or you were just having a normal conversation?
You see, one thing, probably my prior visits to those areas or reporting experience helped me know what that region culturally is, how the people are. There is no, let's say if I were to take a place like, Kalburgi or Gulbarga, as it's more commonly known, or places like, Bidar. Some of these parts are not known even to Kannadigas themselves or to people of Karnataka, because, the news cameras are fixated on the cities. And really, the national media, of course, cannot look beyond Bangalore and its IT city and Silicon Valley and what have you. So sometimes there is this surprise or this wonder for urban audiences when you show them something as fundamental as just a day in the life of a woman in the center of the state, which is Chitradurga. And this was, for instance, Asma, that was her name, and she's a lecturer. And when we were passing through the place, and we would really stop at places where, like I said, there was no prior planned micro device, this thing that, okay, I'm going to stop in this district or something like that. But it's just like, okay, you're going somewhere and let's see what we find. And at one of the taps next to the very famous Chitradurga fort, there was this lady who was filling water at the tap. And I just started talking to her, and it turned out that she was a lecturer, in fact, a very senior lecturer, which, the stereotype of those who are at the public water tap is not somebody who you would think is let's say, a college teacher of a certain subject. And you could see there was so much of innate dignity that Asma had, but put to indignity such as really putting your pot there and, coming back and then having to really wait out and somebody having, so that you return to your house without getting your share of water for that day. So when I was even talking to her, I didn't even have to prepare these questions because one could see what was happening. And it was really like, so it was not even very journalistic in that sense. It was probably person to person, if not woman to woman. It was really like you are seeing something and you are responding to it exactly like how probably someone watching it thinks, really, do you have to go through this every day? And then she took us to her little house there, and there was a whole red sediment at the bottom, and that's what they were having to deal with. And she, of course, along with all her teaching career and utter economic distress. So some of these were meant to. I didn't even want to sensationalize. I didn't have to sensationalize, but from what people were seeing largely on Facebook Live first at the beginning, because that was the only media that I could afford as an independent journalist or as the team of Pickle Jar, was that we actually my colleague at that point, Mithila Hegde, who's a filmmaker herself, my let's say brief to our team was, we say it as we see it. Just say as we see. That's really been my, let's say, philosophy or funda, if you would like to call it that way, is that do not even switch the camera off. And you would say that for a 34-kilometer state highway in a place called Maski on Raichur, you see, there were just, these plastic color pots all through the way. And I didn't even have to say anything. I mean, people who were watching it on Facebook Live at that point, they were like, really? I mean, is that how it is? We really thought that, okay, but we thought that there are water projects that the state government has put in place. This was 2018. And, the Siddaramaiah government was in power. And all that we were saying was that this is just an ordinary day of the life. We are not even trying to exoticize poverty. You just have to, this thing. So, right. Essentially, to answer your question, Mayank, many of these places, whether, again, of course, I went to Bangalore. I mean, if I were to even leave the gender part aside, in Bangalore, which is almost always to be on the boil, communal trouble, Dakshina Kannada, known as the saffron fortress. So even politically speaking, when I was in some of these areas, we just asked questions that were really, top of mind. I remember this PFI, the Popular Front of India, which is just as notorious as the extreme right wing. I just asked them, I literally had to track them down like an investigative journalist would, and finally caught them in Mysore. And they were caught by surprise because probably they didn't realize that someone is just going to be so persistent with this thing. So I just went into their office. And at the end of it, I said, okay, this radicalization of Islamic, let's say the young amongst Islam, there are charges that you do this. How do you counter that? And things like that, which is very, very, and in Shuddha Kannada, some of the leaders were there. And at the end of it, I just asked them, I said, okay, you said all, women, you're doing this for women. You said, no, you're not anti-women. But where are the women here? Because all around me, there's an entire room full of men. It was really like you trained the camera and the camera spoke for itself. So some of these were really the pluses of not being under a television channel which had its a news bulletin hour or deadline or agenda. So in a way, it was very liberating to be on one's own, even though there were, of course, constraints of finance and infrastructure.
To broaden the conversation a bit, what is the status of gender-sensitive journalism in India now?
Oh man, okay. I should realize that I'm speaking to Mayank Chaya after all. So it's like, so one has to be prepared for the bigger picture. Okay, how do I see it? Yeah. See, it's not as if journalists are by themselves or across the country are not being sensitive. Let's tackle sensitive first and then come to gender sensitive. But news issue after issue, whether it's to do with the suicide of an actor like Sushant Singh Rajput's case that we saw, and the absolute hounding of people who were still accused and not like convicted, absolute disregard to the personal rights and liberties of people, or misreporting, misinformation, disinformation, or complete blockage of information, as we saw in the valley in Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370, or in the news across India, even whether it's to do with big issues that need to be debated. There's this complete negating of one whole side. So all these things mean that you are not even being sensitive to the basic ethics of being a journalist, which is to get the other side, or ask the other side, and maintain a semblance of balance. I mean, these are things which you would think are should be a given, like we should not even be, but that's not how it plays out. We all know how insensitive, whether gender wise or even rights wise, we are as a media in India. But here is where my take is that individual journalists, when they don't have to do the bidding of the media houses that they work for, which in turn have either compulsions of corporate ownership, or they have compulsions of their own stated or hidden agenda. Individual reporters, Mayank, so many of them that I meet on a talk basis, on let's catch up for a chai whenever I'm traveling across the country. That dilemmas are very much present, and so there are a lot of people who battle within themselves. I know it might sound like an oxymoron, saying that, okay, if they're so sensitive, then why are they putting out insensitive stuff? So I'm not holding a flag for anybody who's really trampling on all those and really are giving us a bad name. All I'm trying to say is that we need to look at the Indian media not as a monolith, but as like that so-called big elephant. So there are these little parts to it. At this point, I would like to tell those who are viewing your show about networks such as what I have been a part of. Now, this is called the Network of Women in Media India, NWMI. It's informal, hierarchical. There is absolutely no money transaction anywhere. It's almost like a coming together of women from print, electronic, broadcast, digital media, news media largely. But it stands for promoting gender-sensitive journalism. And this has been the case for the past 18 years that I have been a part of. It's not like it's a training institute, but it's almost like when senior journalists, let's say like a Jyoti Purmani, who you may be familiar with in Mumbai, even the Sri Krishna Commission report lauded her efforts in being so on the case of the Mumbai riots, and how she has been reporting on other issues for more than 2-3 decades. Journalists like Ammu Joseph in Bangalore, or Kalpana Sharma from the Hindu in Mumbai, Shakuntala Narasimhan in Bangalore, who I think was one of the longest standing columnists of consumer rights in the Deccan Herald. I mean, or Rajashri Dasgupta from Kolkata, the emergency, the kind of stuff that they've gone through. It's like, you have living role models before you as a decade back as a young journalist, really looking up to mentors within this space. You either reach out to them, or you're just watching them and making sure that you don't fall into the trap of what your media will have you do. And every time there is an ethical dilemma on what you're reporting, or something is really not adding up, or this bias is coming up, then I have had my conscience pricked big time, like so many instances. And so that is why and of course now I'm on a totally new path, which probably even those senior journalists did not face, which is about this polarization. I mean, in India, you have to take sides even as a journalist. Are you pro Modi, anti Modi? Are you left wing, right wing? And I'm like, all through the what we call the Poll Express at that point of time, 1,800 kilometers. 10 districts of Karnataka. Next season, we got braver and bolder and did 3,000 kilometers across Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Kerala. On the, literally on a self-driven vehicle with a former colleague of mine called Chinmay Bhavi. I had to put out at many places I'm wingless. There is no. I mean, there are times when I can see that the left in Kerala is just as bad or more notorious than what kind of communal BJP had done. I even countered Yogendra Yadav on Ravish's show on results day, and likewise we had the freedom to call out BJP like I did when I ended the travel in Wayanad from where Rahul Gandhi was contesting. Now I think so there is this constant sort of fights that you have to be ready for, not just from the people who are watching you, who are like judging you by the minute. Okay, did she say this? Okay, she's pro BJP. Okay, then she must. Oh, she's moderating a book on Veer Savarkar. Why are you saying? I think. Oh, we didn't know you're saffron. You see, and so this kind of things that one has to counter is what today's battle of the Indian media, or really a journalist, or speaking for myself, I face. But then again, like I said, small towns. I have seen a fabulous group of women in Telangana, largely Dalits, bring out a newspaper called Navodayam, which is taking on child marriages and this thing. And so there are these examples of good, ethical people doing their job right across the country, which therefore I'm an eternal optimist. I refuse to succumb to this charge against all of Indian media.
Curious, is gender-sensitive journalism gender-specific in the sense that women tend to do it better than men, and attached to that is the question about the Indian newsroom, where one still finds it's predominantly male, or do that is changing? So these are two, they may look like disparate questions, but they are, I think, in a sense connected.
To your first question, let me see if I've understood right. Are you saying that being gender sensitive as a journalist is believing that women can do it better than men? Is that what your question is?
No, I'm saying, my question is, in order for you to be gender sensitive as a journalist, do you have to be gender specific? Do you have to be a woman? Because that seems the pattern. Men are not. No, but I find men are not able to produce as much as they should, given the fact that men have been a predominant presence in Indian journalism for quite some time, as they have been across the world. Things have changed in the last 20 years or so. So my point is, automatically the fact that you're a woman brings that perspective, which is very different from men, of course. It makes you a little more sensitive to your gender issues.
See, I don't really think so. As much as it is, let's say, ego pleasing for one's own self, that you think that your gender has probably got that extra edge. Let me set things straight. If you were to take the Laadli Award itself, the award is for being gender sensitive. And of course, you can almost read that as being sensitive towards women, but the awards are not only for women journalists. In fact, there are men who win it. And though I don't really readily have the numbers, among the 93 journalists who are from every region, east, north, center, who are in the regional things, I did find, this time it was an online ceremony. It was not even as if one could travel to Mumbai and meet the others who had won these awards. But I would say that there is a good chunk of men, and that, Mayank, has been my experience real time as well. That I have always been, let's say, in workplaces, and probably, I don't know, I might just be this lucky one, and I'm not trying to belittle the experiences of those women who have had absolute as their male colleagues. But I'll tell you that whether even in the radio space, when I was an RJ, and my day job was to say, "Good morning, Bangalore City," and for 4 hours, and I did that for 4 years as a live show. Some of my male colleagues, and even one of the bosses that I reported to, I particularly remember for always being like, that didn't mean that they were patronizing or extra flattering of this thing. It was just that they thought this is the normal way to be, and that's how I have found even in workplaces, people who are by and large very, let's say Srinivasan Jain, one of my former bosses, who I used to report to at one point of time. I didn't find how, let's say, if he would have gone on to the field, maybe sometimes the access is easier. I mean, I have really benefited from being a woman. Let me give you a case in point. I was in Bhatkal, home, unfortunately notorious now as known as Yasin Bhatkal's home place, native hometown in Karnataka. And at that time, there were all these, we landed up at that place, my camera colleague Alphonse and I. And while the male reporters had to really stand outside almost at street, because it was full of people who had gathered around the house. And there was a lot of things saying that, okay, my son is being wrongly accused of being a terrorist. And, all these incidents were happening. And I was the only woman reporter on that particular day. So I was also, of course, biding my time, standing outside with that familiar red mic. But I remember that all of her, one gentleman just came up to me and told me that andar aaye, and it so happened that I was the only one who was let in, because it was literally all the women, the mother and all the women were there, and I just went there and I sat in a corner. I didn't want to, of course, thrust the mic in. As Indian media is accused of aapko kaisa lag raha hai. So, but it was a fact that it was a very poignant moment, seeing all the women so much torn in that moment that someone in their house was, of course, in this sort of news for all the wrong reasons. But I remember thinking, of course, I did speak to her, and then it was, let's say, a more holistic story than probably a male colleague could have got, simply because I had the voices of the women, which was not given to any other. So I'm saying that sometimes the access becomes so much more, and you're trusted more, and it is up to us, I feel, that to not let down the trust. I very recently saw on the farmers issue, Aaj Tak channel, actually some farmers saying that hum aapse baat nahi karenge, and the reporter there happened to be a woman, and I couldn't feel, I felt sorry because I don't know who that person is, but the channel's kind of coverage had made sure that it completely blocked the thing for the journalists. Who knows whether they were by themselves quite issue sensitive in this case. So to just quickly answer your point, I would not really say that it's because I have also seen women on television in some of these channels who are just as who can give a certain Mr. Goswami a run for his vocal power. Women who are in screamathons and just as sort of breaking and violating every sacred law and rule of journalism. So frankly, I will not hold any extra flag for my gender than for good journalists, men or women, period.
Where do you go from here? Does this particular award propel you to do something beyond your domain, as it were, in terms of not just in southern states, but maybe in the next elections across the country?
I would love us to break this election to election cycle. It just so happened that when we were doing 2018, one of my very dear colleagues in the team, Tapan Bhatt, who we unfortunately lost just a month back, he was a guy who was, while some of us were journalists, my colleague Preeti Nagraj and I, who worked together in Indian Express, but he would keep saying that, listen, if you do it right, you can probably play even a better this thing for yourselves in the Lok Sabha election. So that was a huge incentive. And after that, you see, of course, any election anywhere, including the US elections, I always felt that, damn, we couldn't go there. Okay, maybe if it were not for the lockdown, we could have been audacious enough to go to Bihar, go to Trump land, come where you are, Mayank, and probably, seen that these elections up close. But two things have happened. One is that Pickle Jar, and I think it's high time that I told people who are watching us that the man who's interviewing me is in fact the man who's responsible for making Pickle Jar happen in a sense. You see.
No.
For those who came in late, the Pickle Jar is I see it as a company, as an enterprise that is out to tell stories of a changing India via video, text, and voice. So this is the vision that we have for ourselves, to also help companies and organizations tell their stories. And what gives us this position of strength is that we are not only somebody who has seen the Indian media from within. I mean, my own experience across Indian Express, Radio City, the television that I mentioned. Then I had a stint as a documentary anchor for BBC World News. So, long format. And then with forming Pickle Jar in 2016 onwards. So we've really, काफी धक्के खाए हैं हर जगह, and we sort of know, what the media is like. But then I am so glad, Mayank, that we are able to tell stories in a language or languages that the national media is not telling in at all. And then national media is so Hindi when it's not English, that it completely leaves out this significant chunk of the country, which is the South, which speaks in so many different languages. If I were to really go to Belgaum, where I am anyway headed to, and I speak in Tamil, then that's not what the language is. There's more Kannada and Marathi there. If I were to go to Tiruchirappalli, then no way I can pass off as a journalist. If I were to speak in Kannada or Hindi for that matter, forget about anything else. It has to be Tamil and a little bit of English. So what happens when you do not speak the language of that's spoken on that soil? You are excluded from the story of its people. And that is why the media picture of the country is so incomplete. Because it just seems to think that no matter what happens, we will send our star journalists to that place and ask a few questions in Hindi, probably have a translator, and not even bother to find out what's really native to its culture. And that's what we set out to correct. I was actually reporting in Tamil and Kannada and Telugu in this thing. And so that gives me the confidence that while we are a really small entity, independent media at this moment, but there is a certain, we can be upstarts. We can be proud of the fact that we are doing something that you aren't. You, the national media, aren't, which is that we are speaking in these languages to that language people, and that's what really. I'll just end by saying that, for instance, I'm off to Bagalkot in the next couple of days, and Bagalkot again is not even known. It's got such beautiful architectural marvels of, let's say, 500 years back or 12th, 13th century. We have Badami caves, we have Aihole, Pattadakal. Nobody even knows these. And then the notorious part is that it's not only the Devadasi system that women are subjected to this day. It shocks my urban friends who say, oh, come on, it's abolished. But I have done stories from there, and I'm in fact going back to that region to see that how has each of these parts of rural Karnataka, small town Karnataka, doing and done in this lockdown. Children are not able to get back to schools because it's, and nor is the celebrated Manrega working as much as it could, because people are excluded from that system. So to therefore,
Right.
wrap it by saying that rather than this thing, I would love for us to figure out, of course, how we can be financially viable and be able to tell our stories in a manner that befits the regions, the diverse, languages and region and people of this country. It's because there is no shortage of issues or stories to be told, and I want to be able to fill that gap.
I'm so glad you mentioned languages, and you are a polyglot yourself. At my count, you speak about six quite effortlessly, which is a remarkable thing. I think people sitting here in America may find it rather stunning, especially mainstream Americans, that they know more than one language. My point is, do you think journalists generally in India ought to learn more than one language? A lot of them already do know it. So my point is does it help expand your journalistic excellence?
It does. There is really no substitute to speaking to somebody in their mother tongue, and this is an experience. Just a moment, I'm not sure if you're able to hear me clearly. There's a mixie going on.
I can.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I can hear the blending going on.
yeah. It's in the midst of a fully operational household. This interview is going on. Yeah. So
Okay.
I was, when it's a language thing, 2004, when I was asked to take over the primetime radio show on Radio City, which was the country's first private FM. The station was English. It even played largely Western music, though they did have, they figured that there's nothing that sells like Bollywood, and they quickly changed. But I remember that despite having not been trained in radio in that sense, I went there as a guest, and somebody found my voice radio friendly, and very soon I found myself as the host on the other side. But Mayank, I would really, because Bangalore is known to be cosmopolitan, quote unquote, and what does it actually boil down to? It just boils down to that every third person is speaking a different language or comes from a different region. And so I would actually use that, just start off with saying, good morning, this is Radio City, namaskara. Sugam nanale. So you're in between, you're putting your Telugu, Malayalam, a little bit of Kannada within the next sentence. Not every time, but judiciously see what works when, especially when you have a guest on air. And they would be they would feel so honored, saying that, you're a Malayali, and the connect that you establish means that from that point onwards, you're not just another person on the radio, but you are that person who speaks your language. So people are looking out for you. They're rooting for you. That sort of goodwill bank that I can always draw from, no matter, whichever bank balance that Pickle Jar may not have. The fact is that even in regions that we were going to, it was a game changer. It was like people would otherwise not even trust you with telling what they're going through, because it's like, what do you care? God knows where you've come from. But the moment you really sit down, in fact, one of the pictures that from the Laadli Award, this thing that even was shared somewhere on the social media, was literally that my camera colleague and I were sitting on the ground where the Manrega workers, and this was not just some posturing. It was just that I approached that story as humbly as I can, saying that, please tell us what's going on. It's in fact, let's say, our privilege in a way that people actually sit down and tell us that story in such great length. Even though, as you know, when it finally comes on to the television program or video, it's just a minute out of the probably 20-25 minutes they're spent with you. But that all that 19 minutes is going into your bank here, adding up as perspectives for either the next story or for the bigger picture. And that is possible only, I feel, when you know the language. And I've suffered by not knowing the language. And in one of the places in Laos, where a documentary was shot, an episode, it was about the post-Vietnam War and the cluster bombs found in Laos. And so the BBC production crew had organized a translator. It was a dialect called Mong Kong in South Laos. And here I was, some implant from India. And I was trying to understand, because some of them had lost their limbs in that sort of tragedy. Children who picked up thinking that it was a ball, it turned out to be a bomb. Things like that. And I was just only trying to study their face and body language and emotions, which in that part of South Asia is hardly revealing as, let's say, an Indian or Pakistani would. We are so transparent. Our emotions are flying on our face, whether we are angry or sad or delighted. Whereas there, they have this very stoic, very Buddha-like this thing. And I was like, have they accepted, or are they still in grief, or are they in shock? And I just felt this was such a shortcoming. And I was even wishing that this job would have been done better than a journalist from Vientiane, rather than me being flown from India.
Right.
So I felt it was not even fair that I was given this extraordinary privilege for me, of course, but that nuance had gone missing, and that is why, therefore, I feel very very grateful when back in my own home country, when I'm in a position to understand. I just feel, therefore, my stories now are much better than what I used to say some years back, when I didn't realize the value of all this.
Right. To wrap up, one final, again, a slightly broader question. We are in very turbulent times. What do you think the responsibilities of a professional journalist to tell the stories during these times, when if you tell it the way it is, you end up unwittingly accentuating or exacerbating the problem? How do you approach, as a journalist, these turbulent times?
Such a fine question this is, and if at all this is, let's say, an opportunity to speak my mind, I find it just as troublesome, the attitude or the mindset of the left-leaning media, as much as the right-leaning or right-owned media, Mayank, because there is on both sides. So, and I am, because I've also taken a conscious position, both as an individual and as, let's say, editor at Pickle Jar, that we really will not allow ourselves to be swayed by one ideology. And therefore, it's really like, you're like the coconut tree in that hurricane. You're literally pulled and you have to stand your ground. Case in point was a farmer bill. Now that's really rocking the country, or probably not rocking the country enough, because the charge against urban India or the South particularly is that it's not even rallying forces with the farmers, and that's a fair enough charge. But I'm saying that even on groups that I'm a part of, automatically, if an issue, let's say in this case the Punjab farmers who are marching to Delhi, then because I feel, because I'm anti-Modi, therefore I look at even the farmers' issue through a Hindutva lens, which to me, you can always argue your case out why you feel so, but to me it really feels a stretch when you apply one of your chief grouse to every issue. You're most welcome to be opposed to whatever it is, but then I'm not even convinced of your argument. There is a certain intellectual arrogance of the left-leaning media that I find, and I have great friends, and I'm almost always this thing. As much as I'm arguing with the let's say the right-leaning friends, who on the other hand are absolutely blind. You're totally blind to. You just say Swachh Bharat, and they say, okay, Modi has done this, so therefore every village is automatically spotlessly clean. Every toilet is made, under that scheme. There's there is a total buy-in and unquestioning on the other side. So where does it leave this sensible? We started off by asking about the sensitive journalist. I am bringing your attention to the sensitive plus sensible Indian who not necessarily wants to. I mean, I might have voted for BJP, but that doesn't mean that I'm in support of whatever they had done, let's say during the Delhi riots or Article 370 in Kashmir, the way it was all done. But there is no nuance. You are so sold on your own conviction. And recently I had to argue a case on my own media group about when I said, but you know what, the farm bills, and because I have also lived in Bathinda when my father was posted there, UP, Bihar, Gujarat itself, we've spent time. My schooling has been there. And I said, see, Punjab farmers are really different from the kind of farmers that I visit in Gulbarga or this thing. Zameen Asman ka antar hai. The issues are different. Even there you have to speak about margin, but no. It's like, oh, this government is, morally, intellectually bankrupt in this thing. So when I tried to present a view, it was more like, but you know what, Vasanthi, this both sidism has been critiqued. I said, where? I mean, just because it's a Western construct, you can't be. I mean, if the both sidism is to probably just go and speak to the ISIS as if they are a very, aggrieved party and taking their side. I mean, there are issues where we don't take sides because we know. But then to kind of brush aside issues that are happening in India, where farmers who are not, who are actually backing some of these farm laws because they don't want to be at the mercy of the government alone, is not even considered legit. So who is the loser? You see, the joke is on us. We as a country are losing out. So that is why I lay the blame at the door of journalists who feel compelled to be fashionably pro-left, just as much as all those channels that we mentioned at the beginning, let's say Aaj Tak or all these slanging mass, that you will diss the whole protesting farmers as Khalistanis? Really? So you have to, when you ask me what is the responsibility, I feel that there is no way that I cannot be not vigilant. I mean, 10 years back, I could have really enjoyed my tenure much more. So this, this sort of need to ask questions. I can tell you that Akashvani, for instance, a all India radio for which I have great respect. I also did a stint there as a radio presenter, presenting lovely, nice Western soft rock and Hindi old melodies. And of course, great programs there, is only his master's voice. I'm sorry to say, I say this even to my friends, those who support the BJP, saying that just because Akashvani is a state broadcaster doesn't mean that it should not include different voices. I mean, when after this show of yours, when I listen to let's say the last show of the night, and when it's time to turn off, they have their bulletin. And it's almost always Pradhan Mantri ji ne kaha. I don't get to listen to the opposition.
Right.
This is a democracy. Where are the voices? So there is just so much of sidism amongst journalists and media and people and politicians that the middle ground is lost. And those of us who genuinely question both sides, my friend Vikram Sampath's biography of Veer Savarkar, when I took up when he invited me to moderate the discussion, I actually had to put out a post to explain or to actually just give people a nuance, because both sides were like, as I said, some people were delighted. Yeah. Oh, really? We always thought you are this. Humne to socha you're a commie. Not bad. You are doing something like that. And the other side, of course, was like, okay, now you're sold on to the other side. So it's taken me, I think, age, if not personal conviction, to be able to realize that the middle ground is a ground too, and that it is not a fence that I'm sitting on. Right. That it's a perfectly, legitimate position. And at times I'm clueless. I mean, and I've said so. If I'm not, my niece herself was asking me the early days, saying, why have you not put out a post yet what's your take on the farm bill? I said, that's because I don't understand it enough. I don't think we should also assume, that's the other danger, that journalists somehow feel compelled to think that, we are the know-alls. And so the responsibility number 2 is also to say, to be humble, to say when you don't know something, that you say that you don't know. Just say, I don't know.
Right.
But yes, be willing to learn. And Mayank, there is every other day a challenge that Indian media is throwing, or India, sorry, not Indian media, India is throwing at those of us who kind of told ourselves that, okay, we shall be questioners of both sides. But our thing is tested, because, then people ask, okay, now this time which side are you on? On the Sabarimala issue, you might have thought, okay, it's just a question of temple closing, it's gender sensitive, all right. I mean, okay, it's about women being allowed the right to enter. And so when I said that, there are some women who feel that it's okay to not be allowed to enter. That's also gender sensitivity. It's tricky. I know people might find this thing very perplexing. But when there was a national media that reached out to me, an English channel, saying, come on as a guest on a panel. I said, but why would I come? I'm sorry, I wouldn't. She said, ye to Shabarimal hai na? I said, ha, Shabarimala hai. In India, in South India, we have an A for everything as opposed to the North culture. So I said, ha, Shabarimala. Yeah. But neither am I a Malayali, nor am I a devotee of Lord Ayyappa, nor am I a card-holding Kerala expert. So I shouldn't even be doing that. But I could see how condescending that anchor was when I watched the bulletin that day to a Nair woman who was saying that, I feel, why should the court interfere? And, there's this whole thing of, we are so progressive and therefore we should be always seen as a certain stand on women. But the reality is something else. And that's why when I went to Kerala, I made it a point to also reach out to those women who felt it was an intrusion to their faith. So likewise, I think the responsibility is to constantly educate ourselves. The fourth responsibility, and I hope this is the last one on my list of zimmedariyan journalists ke patrikaron ke, is of please be backed by data and facts. There's a lot of politics around data itself, yes. But I'm saying it's so anecdotal. It's so emotional.
Right.
And it's Ram Janam Bhoomi, farm laws, this thing. You have this thing, except that sometimes you have to really step back and say, okay, this doesn't please me because it's going against the very grain of what I believe. But there are certain things which we need to look at, which is the other side. Too bad if you get called as the both sidist, as I'm discovering this coinage for myself. Right. But I think one of the last books I've been reading is Factly by Hans Rosling, where he's saying that the world is much, much better than what you think. And he has this delicious, jibe at journalists in the final chapters. It's almost like saying that, please pardon the journalists, they don't know what they speak, kind of, So it's like, they know not what this. So it's like, okay, hum log aaye mic pakad ke and we did this. But we therefore need to really take this personally, this charge, and educate ourselves to bring back those things that we learned in school, in J school at least, which is to necessarily be objective, or at least as objective as you can. And right. Please balance somebody.
Just one, in conclusion, one observation and one somewhat light question. The observation being, you mentioned the middle way or the middle ground. There was one that lived 2,500 years ago who built an entire philosophy around the middle way, as you might know. I'm talking about, of course, Gautam Buddha. Yeah. And more importantly, for this specific purpose, I was amused recently that there was a rash of videos extolling the virtues of the Indian sari. And I thought I should get your perspective, because you
you are famous for unveiling an entire collection of some remarkable saris. So, what do you think is there a movement again, a revival in saris in India?
Uh, it's a revival, but that again is a very elitist revival. It's see the people,
Yeah.
the working class, or people, let's say, some of my elder cousins, my mother for sure, and my grandmother absolutely. In fact, my grandmother used to be in that what's called the 9-yard sari. It's called the Madisar.
Nawari, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Very graceful and elegant to see. And for them, it was really not a big deal, just as it is not for my mother. In fact, I've not even seen her in this national Indian wear called the nightie. You see, they always almost wear the sari. I can see the point why people are trying to revive, because it is true that some of those who find it so convenient to wear the Western wear, which is just as good if you ask me if that's what they like to wear. But you see, nostalgia just hits you, and it's almost like how people become more Indian after they go out of India, and you would know that. you
Right.
want to stay true. You want to keep what you are so afraid will go away, and I think that's the psyche at work here. A lot of good has come out of the revivalist movement, if we can call it that. There was this thing called the 100 Sari Pact, which I think was a mother of all revival movements about 4-5 years back, when two women decided that okay, we'll wear saris for 100 days in a year at least, and every time we wear a sari, we'll post a picture of ourselves and say a little story about that. And that really went viral. I also got drawn into it at some point. And what I see the positive outcome of that, Mayank, let me tell you that first, is that weavers who are really languishing, whose exquisite craftsmanship, every region of this country is so, you go to Madurai, you'll get the Sugudi, you'll get the tie and dye and bandhani in Gujarat. There is Pochampalli in Andhra. There is, of course, a Banarsi and Northeast, those, the Mishal weaves, and Karnataka, of course, Mudakal, Muru, and so many other things that we ourselves do not know anymore. And, in fact, my mother would not know beyond, let's say, the Kanchivaram, etc., as much as some of the younger women who are part of this revivalist movement now have a discerning eye for. There is one thing which had almost gone extinct, the Udupi sari. And I know that there was almost a social media push on one of this group called Sari Speaks that I'm a part of. The people said, you know what, this is almost, but will some of you like to buy those? And then before you knew it, women from across the country were picking it up. And these are like handcrafted, hand woven. They don't cost much, at least some of those. And so that I feel is really great. I'm also I got called to be the sari ambassador at an event called Women Weaver for Wednesdays, where because of the lockdown, weavers have absolutely lost their jobs and livelihood. Their children are suffering and all that. But people have come together and say that every Wednesday we will also go online with a sale and to liquidate stocks of weavers. So this is, to me, again, since the gender sensitive seems to be the theme of this thing, it's like really, really sensitive, which otherwise could have been, it could have just been yet another thing you probably pick up online. But now you are so respectful of what you're wearing. I really, this incidentally is a chicken. It's so beautifully, this thread work presented by my friend Yamini Mishra when I went to Lucknow. So every region that I travel to, I do make it a point to pick up something which long after I've come back reminds me. Every time I pick this up, I take it out from my wardrobe. I know that, okay, this is my heritage. This is where I come from. It's a very, very rich one. So as such, the movement is, I doubt if it will really bring back people to wear saris every day, like let's say this thing, but that's fine. as long as there is even an aspiration for a woman, whether Indian or even outside, if you manage to inspire people from even outside, to say that this is such a fabric, and it truly feels special. I mean, at the risk of sounding very like an advertisement or something, I have reported in a sari in a bomb blast, and I reported it. Worn a sari when I was standing on top of Raichur thermal power plant to report on pollution in the region with some Marilyn Monroe moments where my pallu is flying off, and there's just so much of wind at that place. In police lathi charge. So though I wear other stuff, but for me these are again something which comes very naturally to me. And I think when somebody says that, okay, Vasanthi, you did this, so can you model for that sari? Then of course I'm absolutely pleased, and you see, I don't mind flaunting the fabric at all if it manages to push anybody towards the 6-yard wonder again.
True, absolutely. Oh, it's been wonderful, Vasanthi. I want to thank you for your time, and we will, of course, notify you about the premiere pretty soon. I'll do an introduction separately, so I hope you didn't think that I just pushed you into the conversation.
Not at all.
All right.
I mean, I know I'm in the best hands when I sign up for being a guest of the show. But then again, I also want you to add this bit to my conclusion that I never finished that story of how Mayan Chaya came to be. In a way, this let's say the chief pickler at Pickle Jar, even without his realizing it.
You were embarrassing me.
You may close your ears. That's okay. It's not even meant for you. But it's just that it gives me an opportunity to say how grateful I am, Mayank, to you, because when I was with this group of friends trying to curate a Smita Patil, or rather, film festival that we wanted to, Smita Patil films that I wanted to watch. It was you who nudged me in 2015 to say that why would you only want to watch it yourself? Pure shehar ko dikhao. And we became film festival curators, which of course I went on to name as Pickle Jar. That name, of course, came to me from some, I think, bold thing. But that idea to form a group and collective at that time to curate the Smita Film Festival, to have Shyam Benegal, of course, on board, and Mahesh Bhatt and so on and so forth, Amul Palekar, is in a way a precursor to the media storyteller that Pickle Jar today is. That's the journey we've had. But even at the risk of embarrassing you, you were the starting point.
Oh, no, that's very lovely of you to say. I'm touched. Thank you.
That starting point shall be my ending point.
Thank you. Lovely talking to you, and all the best. We'll be in touch.
Sure.
Namaskar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.